This is DawgNation Postgame, brought to you by R.S. Andrews, Kroger, Pella Windows and Doors, Cercheros, Lassiter Tractor, White's Pools, the UGA Bookstore, and Jittery Joe's Coffee. Now here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Hello, Dog Nation. Good Saturday night to you. Welcome into our DawgNation Postgame show. I'm live here at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium. It's obviously a mad scene here right now where literally there are tens of thousands of Ole Miss fans on the field below me. We can't be in our normal spot because the field is totally taken over by Rebels fans. It's also raining for what it's worth. And in the next couple of minutes, it certainly appears that Ole Miss students are going to attempt, in this area right here behind me, they're going to attempt to throw the goalpost over the side of Vaught-Hemingway Stadium. There's no way that's a good idea, but that may be what's about to happen. You obviously saw the final moments of this game play out as the madhouse that it was. Fans coming on the field early, perhaps if you're of a certain age, reminiscent of Georgia against Tennessee back in 2000. Really the only time in my lifetime I can think of Georgia fans ever storming the field. They were taken back off, then Ole Miss took its knees, and the celebration was on. I'm going to bring in Davin Bellamy here in a moment. Just by way of, I guess, quick synopsis and all this here this evening, when Georgia lost its other game here in the 2024 season against Alabama, I think there was a reasonable conversation to be had about some positives to take away from that game after getting out to a very, big deficit to begin with. Georgia obviously stormed back, took the lead briefly. It was an exciting game. I think that there was a degree to which some Georgia fans were in a pretty good mood, at least a portion of the fan base for a narrow set of reasons was in a pretty good mood after the game against Alabama. I don't think there will be any of that tonight. There is very little positive to take from what happened here tonight. Georgia obviously not able to do anything offensively. Attempt to establish the run did not work. Attempt to mitigate what had been some turnover issues for Carson Beck, and yet the very conservative pass plays that Georgia chose to throw didn't really result in anything. There were drops tonight. There were more fumbles than we can probably count. And the offensive line for Georgia had its worst day that I can almost remember, certainly any time in the Kirby Smart era, where a Georgia offensive line was as manhandled as this one was tonight. It was pretty well bad all the way around. The season's not over. Georgia, obviously in an expanded playoff, is still alive there. But, of course, it has to play much better than it did tonight. So that's kind of my quick synopsis of all of this. Obviously, you've grown to appreciate the opinions on Davin Bellamy, the former Georgia star, on nights like this, too. Davin, you know what winning football looks like. You were a part of winning football. You love your dogs even when they don't win. We all know that. But tonight is probably a night to have a tough conversation here. Georgia plays poorly, loses convincingly to Ole Miss here, and it leaves you asking a lot of questions about where the Dogs perhaps do go with some playoff hopes still alive, but not exactly looking like a playoff caliber team. Davin, what did you make of what you saw here this evening?
It's tough. I spoke about, in the pregame show about, the style makes the fight. And I was worried coming into this game because, Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin, they're explosive. And you had Dart, who was leading almost in every passing, category. And just from watching their games, man, they're so explosive. And one thing that we lack is stopping explosive plays and also creating explosive plays on offense. So I just think the style made the fight. And with Ole Miss D-line, they were built to play ahead so they can rush the passer. They have guys that aren't there to stop the run. They're there to get TFLs and sacks. And it marries up perfect with a high-powered offense because if you cannot match them and you get down 2 possessions, and I said this in the pregame show, if you get down 2 possessions and you allow those guys to just pin their ears back to where they know you have to stay in the game and passing the ball is the way you're going to do that, then they're going to show you why they lead the nation in sacks. So, it's just the style made the fight, and I've been worried about, Ole Miss all week.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really fair point, Davin, and I love the way you described that. And, for me, if you want to look at Ole Miss on both sides of the ball, they were the team that was really pushing the envelope with all the exciting plays. I don't know how many truly explosive, plays they had offensively, but boy, they were doing a great job of creating open wide receivers, and they were certainly having those big highlight reel plays defensively that there's no doubt that because of the success that the Rebels were having on the so-called highlight reel type moments, it clearly appeared tonight they were bringing a level of energy into this game, fueling off obviously a raucous crowd. They were bringing a level of energy tonight that Georgia was just having a very hard time matching, and frankly proved incapable of matching for most of the night.
No doubt. And like we've always said all year, it's a Super Bowl whenever we come in town. And Georgia being Georgia with the type of quality team we've been over the last 5-6 years, whenever we come in town, fans are looking to storm the field. That's why you got to take it a game at a time, not get, caught up in the rankings, and just understand it doesn't matter where that team is ranked or where you are ranked. Whenever you're playing that opponent, they're looking at you as their championship game. And I just think Ole Miss had way more juice than Georgia did today. And once they got out above, on the scoreboard, I think we kind of, tucked our tails a little bit, and they kept their foot on the gas.
An update here on the goalpost. They have decided not to throw it off the back of the stadium. They can't figure out what to do with it because it's still almost totally intact. It won't fit through the corridors here to go, underneath the stadium. Someone's going to get hurt. This is a wild scene right now, and as Davin said, it's the kind of celebration that ensues after your team beats Georgia, but that's no consolation for UGA fans. Obviously, it's a bad night for the Georgia offense. We're going to talk about that a lot tonight. We also want to give you a chance to be a part of the show, too. If you're watching Facebook, YouTube, DawgNation.com, just simply click the link, and you can be a part of the chatter here tonight. Joseph and Griffin, your first up tonight on the DawgNation Postgame Show, live from Vaught Hemingway Stadium on the campus of Ole Miss. Joseph, tough night tonight. What did you think about it?
Yeah, it was a tough night, B.A. Hey, Davin, nice seeing you again. Yeah, man, that game there, I wish we could erase it from our memories, but I can't. The offense played didn't play well. Defense didn't play well. We actually suck. It's unbelievable. Kirby, you know this more than I do, Davin, that Kirby normally had the team up, ready to go, but we was sleepwalking through the whole game. It just unbelievable. We got to do better. We got a tough team coming up next week, Tennessee. They're going to come in and hide and heavy. We still, like B.A. said, we still do have things ahead of us. We still can do this thing, but we got to get better. We got to get better. We don't get no better than we're going to be home again like we were last year in the playoffs and sucking on our thumbs. This is going to – Kirby got to get this right. If we don't get this right, then it's gonna be a lost season.
Well, Joseph, you're always a good caller, and I appreciate that. And Davin, I think a point that Joseph makes is absolutely true in that we live in a 12-team playoff world now. There is space for losses, frankly, given the difficult nature of the Georgia schedule. I think at least a loss was anticipated by many for this team, and by the time it's all said and done, everybody in college football may have a loss. It's just that kind of season in our sport here right now, but that doesn't mean that eventually you don't get into a must-win scenario, and I have a hard time imagining that this upcoming Saturday, a week from now against Tennessee, is anything other than an absolute must-win scenario where you absolutely have to play far better than you did tonight. That Georgia, by losing a couple of very tough road games at Alabama and Ole Miss, has now kind of put itself in a must-win situation the rest of the way. And frankly, based on the way that Georgia played tonight, I certainly have no idea how they're going to respond to that scenario. If they can withstand that challenge, I simply don't know. But we have reached the must-win portion of the year for Georgia where you simply can't, just shrug off a loss. The next one, if it does come, would probably end Georgia's postseason hopes, if I'm doing the math in my head about what the playoff scenario may actually look like.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of expect it with how tough, the SEC is, that you would still be able to win the conference with 2 or 3 losses. I think the thing that scares me is how we're losing. Right now, our offense still doesn't have and identity. We spent the first half of the year trying to get the running game going and wanted Carson Beck to manage the game. Then we transitioned into giving him the keys to the offense where he's throwing it 29, 30 plus times a game. And then that led to more turnovers. And then like you saw tonight, we took the keys away again. I think that's the only thing that's kind of worrying me. It's not that we're losing, it's how we're losing it. The defense didn't play that bad today. When you look at the first drive, it was a interception and then field goal, field goal, field goal, field goal. Our offense eventually, has to put some points on the board to keep the defense going. We held them to field goals the whole first half, and we didn't score. If we just put the ball in the box one or two times, the momentum switches sidelines, and we're maybe having a different conversation. But I don't think the defense played that bad tonight. Our offense just had to find some identity and find a way to consistently put points on the board.
I think you're bringing up a really good point, and I'm glad you said it the way that you did, that of course there were some times tonight when Ole Miss was really exploiting the Georgia pass defense. Of course, that's true. But when you look at the final total, it's 28 points scored. In a modern age, I can say that the Georgia defense, for the most part, sort of did its job. Could have played better, but sort of did its job. It did force field goals several times. Ole Miss got a really good kicker. Frankly, I had no idea that he was as good of a kicker as he is.
Right.
But you forced those field goals a few times. That I do think that the Georgia defense gave Georgia a chance to win this game tonight. It was not perfect, not perfect by a long shot, but I thought the Georgia defense gave this team a chance to win. But Davin, I can't put a positive spin on what Georgia did offensively tonight. I can't gloss that up, and I can't sell that as anything other than sort of just total ineptitude. You tried to establish the run, did not work. You're clearly worried about Carson Beck's penchant for interceptions, so you called a very safe game, and that produced nothing. There were fumbles, there were drops. It was a disaster by the Georgia offensive line. There is very little in the way of redeeming qualities from what Georgia did tonight offensively. Kind of an F grade across the board almost.
Yeah, I'm trying to find some positive words and just trying to look at it the best way. And I just think the only way that I can think about it is going forward. I mean, you just have to open it up and kind of put the ball in Beck's hands. I mean, when we were playing our best offense, it's when he was throwing the ball 30-plus times a game. I don't think we have the offensive line and the running back to get 3 yards here, 4 yards here, and just get those yards in a cloud of dust like we've usually had in the past. We're not made up like that. So it's kind of forcing the identity to be all on Carson Beck because, I mean, we just can't create explosive plays. And a testament is going back to the defense. Well, they're being put on the field so many times because so many 3 and outs, and we can't convert on third downs that, eventually the defense can't always come on the field and put the fire out. Those guys get tired. But in the grand scheme of things, I just think we just got to trust Carson Beck because the running game is not doing it for us.
No, I think that's exactly right. Georgia loses tonight 28-10 against Ole Miss. It was a game in which, really from the word go, Georgia had a hard time establishing anything. And listen, Dad, one of the things I try to be careful about doing is, I don't bring a lot of individual names to the discussion and, drag those guys through the mud because, frankly, I like these Georgia players and I want to support them. And, I think most of our audience does too. And yet you also want to have an honest conversation after the game. And, I think this is one of those things where some of us, I'm talking about media types like me, probably need to own some of the things that we sometimes say because, look, a lot of times this year, we would have been saying about Kirby Smart and about Mike Bobo and perhaps Josh Crawford of, hey, why don't they have Nate Frazier in the game more? You got to get Nate Frazier in the game more. This is a guy that's got the ability to be a playmaker. I know he's only a freshman, but you got to have this guy in there. And tonight, I do think you saw some evidence, even though Frazier's obviously a dynamic athlete. Everybody knows that. But I do think you saw some evidence of why it is that Georgia is careful with a freshman such as that because he clearly did not protect the football tonight. And that really was obviously a huge problem for UGA and a little bit of a reminder of sometimes over the course of a year when coaches are perhaps being more cautious than maybe we as fans or we as media types want them to be, oftentimes you end up getting a reminder of, oh, yeah, this is why they were being so cautious prior to this, because the young running back, who I believe has a very bright future ahead of him, he just had a hard time holding on to the football tonight, and you clearly can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to being, a freshman, there are more things to getting on the field than just how good you play. One is how mature you are off the field, and one, your attention to detail in the microscope, of the play. I love Frazier tonight because he was getting those 3-4 yards in a cloud of dust. But those attention to details at the end of the rep, it's the ball high and tight. And then you put more on that with rain. So, you ask for the freshman to get more carries. And honestly, in our backfield, he deserves more carries. He's doing the most with the ball. We give it to him. But I think he kind of reminded you tonight, why sometimes you want to slow down on, mounting freshmen so early, because those are still some small attention to detail things that separates a freshman from somebody that's older.
So let me ask you this, and I think you have an interesting perspective because you line up across from guys just like this all throughout your career, still do now. The Georgia offensive line coming into the season was a group that I expected to be perhaps the best position group on this team, either side of the ball. Probably the best offensive line in college football. I just think objectively, measurably, Georgia had a level of depth at its offensive line that nobody else in the country could really match. And for whatever reason, Davin, it just hasn't happened. And once again, as I said before, I am not going to drag anybody through the mud or anything like that. It's not what I'm here to do, but we want to try to have an honest conversation. Tell me how it is that a lot of guys who have played good football before, many of these guys have played good football together, because I do believe chemistry matters with an offensive line, 5 guys working together, obviously. This is a group that we weren't just making this up. We had seen these guys play well. Georgia has had good offensive lines now multiple years in a row. Many of these guys were a part of that success. And it's just not happening. It's not happening in the running game. They clearly couldn't protect tonight for Carson Beck. Now, I know how good the Ole Miss defensive front is. You described that very well a little earlier. But how is it that we're getting such a lesser performance from this Georgia offensive line than we would have expected to have gotten here this year?
Well, when it comes to, tonight they were put in a tough situation. And I'm going to give you this answer as a defensive end, someone that loves to rush the passer. When you get a team down and they have to pass the ball, that is what you wake up and go to practice for. That is why a defensive end plays the game. 90% of defensive ends do not like playing the run. That's why we always say establish the run. Once you establish a run on a defensive line, it's like a boxer throwing body blows into the stomach. Then when third down come, that running game has fatigued him so much that get off is not the same, or he's confused during play action because you're running the ball so well. So you slow down that get off. When you're playing a team like Ole Miss and they're built to play with the lead, and all that defensive end know is you're passing the ball, you're down 2 possessions, the running game's not going, I have the crowd on my side, we're going to eat. And they lead the nation in sacks, one, because of how explosive their offense is. So when it comes to the Georgia O-line tonight, kind of like I said in the pregame, you want to protect your O-line by somehow not being so predictable. But in a way of not being predictable, you manage the game to where you're not down 2 possessions early where these guys, can lick their chops. So I just think the team that led the nation in sacks came out today and showed why they led the nation in sacks. So I won't put too much on the O-line because they have played well coming in, especially protecting Beck. I just think tonight was just a style of fights, and Ole Miss just had the more weapons in their corner.
Great graphic work by our team tonight. You just saw that on the screen. 5 sacks, 9 tackles for loss for Ole Miss. A really, really tough number, but obviously it speaks to the success they had defensively. Davin, let me get one more with you, and we'll get ready to let you go. And obviously we'll hopefully have happier conversations in the days to come. You know, if you want to be as candid as you possibly can be, I think what you'd have to say about a night like this is that all the things that Kirby Smart has been saying throughout the weeks on Carson Beck about, you know, expressing confidence and saying that he thought that Beck was playing well no matter what others in the media or maybe fans might be saying, I think the game plan tonight indicates that Kirby and Coach Bobo and those guys probably did not believe that as much as Kirby was saying that, because this was a very careful game plan tonight. In fact, look at like third quarter drives where Georgia is, you know, chewing up a lot of time. They're moving down the field, but eventually not scoring and really not getting really any in the way of explosive plays. That anything that Georgia did tonight that was successful in any way was almost kind of like nibbling around the edges. That I think the way in which the game was called tonight by Georgia offensively after 3 interceptions from Beck last week, I think gives you an indication of how confident this coaching staff is in him right now. I don't think Carson Beck is even close to the main reason that Georgia lost tonight. In fact, I think he made a couple of pretty good throws. But he certainly didn't put his fingerprints on this game. And I'm not really quite so sure the game plan was ever going to give him a chance to do that. This was a very, very careful and safe game plan that did not work, birthed out of an organization right now that just doesn't have very much confidence in itself on that side of the ball. Tell me where I'm wrong about that.
I mean, you are absolutely right. This game plan was for a freshman. This game plan reminded me of what Florida did when they was trying to ease, you know, DJ, you know, into the game. I mean, to be a fifth-year guy and just have the keys taken away from you is not what we want to see as Georgia fans. I'm trying to find some glimpses and of hope, because tonight when you take the keys out of his hands and try to rely on the defense to create turnovers and to create touchdowns and your running game, that's even inconsistent with Georgia right now. You know, the Texas style defense that we saw, we had 5 sacks and 9, you know, tackles for loss. You didn't see that today. So I mean, I'm kind of at a loss for words. And I definitely think just from this point moving forward, we can't have this. It's like you damn if you do, you damn if you don't. But we can't have this just basic game plan because our offense is just not explosive enough to get it done. So everything you said was, you know, absolutely correct, and I definitely agree.
Well, Davin, you're a good man. I love working with you. I love talking to you. And obviously, as we move towards the week, you know, there'll eventually be a happier conversation. Obviously, Georgia's going to have its shot in front of its own, you know, raucous crowd next week with a chance to beat Tennessee. And eventually, we'll get focused on that and talk about how that can happen. But obviously, I think you struck the right tone tonight. Not a fun one, not a good one. Tough day to be a Georgia Bulldog. But we're always proud to talk about these dogs with you, Davin. So thanks for being a part of our DawgNation Postgame show here tonight. We'll look forward to catching up with you this week.
We still control our destiny, baby. Go Dogs.
That's right. I like that from Davin Bellamy, that Georgia still can be control here and Georgia can still play its way in. And, you know, let me tell you a couple of things you don't want to hear, and then we'll kind of get back to all the other stuff. You know, any comparison of what Georgia is tonight has to be made with, you know, other teams who kind of have their own sort of version of clunkers a little bit too. I mean, you know, Ohio State, for instance, played very poorly against Nebraska. You know, Oregon had some really sort of poor performances to begin the season. They're obviously playing much better now. In the SEC, you know, Texas has had its moments. Alabama has clearly not been perfect after it, you know, lost after it beat Georgia, I should say. So when you look at the blemishes for Georgia, and there are clearly a lot of them after a night like this, it still has to be mentioned within the context of everything else that's going on in college football. But as I said before, I know you don't want to hear that tonight because you want to kind of dissect what this was, and I think you have every right to do that. And listen, I don't really have much of a positive spin. You know, for instance, last week when Carson Beck was throwing interceptions, I think that you could spin that one a little bit positively by saying, boy, I thought that Georgia got pretty clever, pretty creative when it absolutely had to move the football, when it absolutely had to get some drives going. Georgia also running sort of a safe collection of passing plays, found a way to make those work and found a way to win that game. Well, you can't say that about tonight. And a lot of that's probably due to the level of opponent that Georgia is playing in a game like this compared to a Florida team that's obviously nowhere near a top 25 level team here right now. So step up in weight class with a different level of opponent, and all of a sudden it's a very different level of performance. But the way in which you could kind of spin the Alabama loss, at least they came back, or some of the games like Florida where it wasn't quite so perfect, well, at least they found a way to do it when they had to. There is nothing to sell from this here tonight. And I think if you're a Georgia fan, you have every right to be concerned about this season for UGA ending far sooner than anybody probably thought that it would. That you absolutely have a possibility of that being the case. Doesn't mean that it will. Georgia could still find a way to play good football. But it's getting pretty late here for this Georgia team to sort of show us what they are and be the best version of themselves in games that matter. And tonight is obviously a lost opportunity on all of that. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to hear from Jeff Sentell a little bit later on. Kaylee Manziel will tell us what Lane Kiffin had to say before it's all said and done here tonight. We'll hear from Kirby Smart, but we want to hear from you too. So line up, get going here. Click the link, YouTube, Facebook, DawgNation.com. Be a part of the show. Let's talk about where it went wrong for Georgia tonight as a part of our DawgNation postgame show. And while we're getting those phone calls ready to jump on here, and a lot of you, we just heard from Davin and me a lot. We're about to hear from a lot of you here over the course of the next few minutes as well. As we're doing all that, let me remind you that, of course, one of our great sponsors tonight are our friends at the UGA bookstore. Great-looking UGA apparel, and obviously next week for a big home game against Tennessee, you want to be decked out and looking good. There's no better place to get the best UGA apparel than right there with our friends at the UGA bookstore, right next to the Tate Student Center, right across from Sanford Stadium. It's the place with the dog shop. It's the Nike coaches gear. It's the Vineyard Vines, the Tommy Bahama, Johnny O, Peter Millar, 47 brand, Southern Tide, all of Cutter and Buck, all of the great apparel makers that have all the great looking UGA gear. The UGA bookstore sells it all, and they want to sell you some too. So stop by and see them at any point in time during the week. Come by and see us after the game next Saturday. Don't forget, it's been a long time since Georgia's had a home game. There will, of course, be a great collection of autographed guests this upcoming Saturday. So you can check out their website for more on that. It's UGAbookstore.com. And then we'll be doing our DawgNation postgame show back live in Athens next week. So come up and see us. Second floor of the UGA bookstore after the game. Hopefully, we're talking about a much happier set of circumstances than we're talking about here tonight. Because, listen, Georgia's obviously got the chance to play better football. They just got to find a way to do that. So let's get some phone calls here right now. Next up, Ryan Walker. You're on our DawgNation postgame show. Ryan, I'm always glad to hear from you. You've always got a lot of insight. Help us make sense of this one tonight, Ryan, because it was not pretty.
What's going on,
Ryan,
BA? What's going on, everybody?
Good to hear from you.
Can you hear me now? Can you guys hear me now, BA? What's going on, everybody? Let's just call a spade a spade. I'm gonna keep this short. I'm not even gonna say short and sweet. I'm just gonna keep it honest with you. We took a good old fashioned ass whipping tonight that grandma's Lysol couldn't wash out. Let's keep this honest. Now, today we literally got whipped on both sides of the ball. This doesn't happen often, but we got matched up on both sides of the ball. Offensive line got dominated tonight, literally got run through. And then you had the defensive line that got pushed around. This does not happen. If you look at it, if you want to win ball games, you got to control the line of scrimmage. We didn't do either. So it's no excuses. The other issue that we have, wide receivers are dropping passes. We lead the nations in drop passes. You can't have explosive plays if guys can't hold on to the football, period. You can't. So Beck, he throws his interceptions. Beck is who we know who he is. You have to understand that. But he has to also have help. But some of these receivers also got to take some accountability. London Humphreys, the kid out of Stanford, number 84. Let's just be honest. When you look at this, it's just not a good performance overall. Nate Frazier had great runs, but he put the ball on the turf. We can't win ball games if that ball is on the turf, period. You can't turn over the ball and expect to win games. It just doesn't happen that way. Now, as for Kirby Smart, Kirby, I love you, but I'm going to call a spade a spade. If you guys remember in Rocky 3 when Rocky won that championship belt and had all those setup fights, Mick said, hey, you've lost your hunger since you got that title. You've gotten the title of being the new Nick Saban, but guess what? You have to continue to keep that going. You can't let these guys get comfortable on the side when Carson Beck, your leader, was smiling with 3 minutes left in the game, and we're down 22-10 after a turnover. That's unacceptable. So it has to start from the top and come down. Mike Bobo, average play calling tonight. He's had some good games this year, but he is who we know who he is. Our play caller that we let walk out of the door, Buster Faulkner, that's at Georgia Tech. And also, you got Todd Hartley, who definitely could possibly do something. It's got to change. It's got to change all the way around. We have a lot of talent that's going to be coming in. But next year, how is this talent going to flow if we don't have better play calling next year and we don't have guys coming in hungry, and we have to just change the mindset and go back to what we know. Chopping wood, being hungry, and just being aggressive. Conservative play calling on defense has cost us. Less blitzing. You have two of the best edge rushers and one of the best linebacking cores in the country, and you're not allowing these guys to hunt. And we've got to get better fundamentally at playing corner. We give too much cushion and play too much zone defense opposed to playing bump and run where you got physical corners who can play. We got to start doing better all the way around. I'm not going to sit and rant and rave because guess what? We got Tennessee next week. So we got Tennessee. We pick up this win and win out, do what we need to do, let the chips fall where they may. It's still go dog. So, folks, I appreciate you having me on, BA.
Yeah, Ryan, I think it's great. Yeah, Ryan, I always love your insight, and I think that you bring a lot of passion to the conversation. You're right, it's go dogs no matter what. But obviously tonight, a night where a lot of Georgia fans, as you very correctly say, have a lot of concerns on both sides of the ball. Better night defensively than it was offensively, but certainly a defense that gave up way too many wide open passes. You know, secondary really kind of getting picked apart at times. And Lane Kiffin doing a really good job of isolating, whether it's a linebacker or a safety or a nickelback, really getting the matchup that he wanted. You know, Lane Kiffin, I thought tonight, had a real, as he's, you know, at times known to do, a real diabolical offensive game plan where it didn't produce a ton of points necessarily. And Ole Miss settled for field goals more than they perhaps would have liked to have. But clearly they kept it moving, and they were certainly playing with a spark on that side of the ball that Georgia just simply did not have. Let's go back to phones again. Our good friend Kathy's checking in from Franklin, Tennessee. Kathy, we're always glad to hear from you. Welcome into the Dog. All right, we'll get Kathy here in a minute. While we're getting the phones back up and running again, let me also touch on something else that Ryan was talking about, which is that, you know, when Georgia wouldn't get in trouble, like let's say last year, because last year, you know, this was not, you know, a team that dominated every single Saturday either. But when they found themselves in trouble at Auburn, for instance, another kind of loud crowd, a team nowhere near as good as this Ole Miss team tonight, but still in a tough spot, you know, what did Georgia do? They pushed that easy button over and over and over again in the second half of that game, continually going to Brock Bowers. That's what Georgia did over and over and over again on that particular Saturday. Well, I think one of the things that you're left to conclude as you watch Georgia right now is there's no easy button to push. And that's not me disparaging the guys. I'm just saying that there is no guy that's sort of like your MJ or your Kobe. You know, when there's 5 seconds of the shot clock, you got to have somebody just sort of jack one up. You don't have that guy on this Georgia offense right now, and that absence, like a Brock Bowers would have been, or perhaps Ladd McConkey would have been, that's pretty glaring here right now. Let's get Kathy in Franklin, Tennessee. Kathy, you're next up on our DawgNation Postgame show. Kathy, we're always glad to hear from you. Tough night tonight here for these Georgia Bulldogs. What'd you think about it?
It was hard to watch. Can you hear me?
I sure can,
Can you guys
Kathy.
hear me?
I sure can.
Yeah. Hey.
I sure
it
can,
was hard
Kathy.
to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was tough to watch. Your former caller, what was his name, Ryan? He stole a lot of my thunder. Yeah. A lot of the same observations. Just we really got beaten on both sides of the ball. We just really got beaten all around. I was in some chat rooms, and there was lots of griping about Beck, but really, I can't lay this at the feet of Carson Beck. This is the whole team. This was a team loss. We didn't step up defensively. Our offense was flat. The offensive line was like a sieve. They were really struggling. They didn't have an answer for those pass rushers. And it was just an overall disappointing game to watch. Just was. I think we won time of possession, and we gave up fewer yards in penalties, and that was about it. That was all we won tonight. So honestly, my biggest concern with this team is chemistry. I just am not convinced that the leadership that we need to see in this team is in the locker room. It just doesn't seem like it's there. I made the same observation that Ryan made. I noticed it really bothered me to see Carson Beck smiling on the bench 3 minutes before the game was over. Maybe it shouldn't have. Maybe I should be happy this young man is not just freaked out. But it bothered me to see him smiling when they were losing like that. So I think we've got chemistry and leadership issues within the team, and I hope they can really pull it together. We got to beat the Vols. You guys know how I feel about the Vols. And Georgia Tech show they've got more than a lot of people have given them credit for this season today, didn't they? So we can't be writing them off either. We've got 2 big games ahead of us. We got to win out.
No, Kathy, I think you're absolutely right about that, and I always appreciate it. And you're a good Georgia fan. You've earned the right to say your piece, and I'm glad that you did right there. And a lot of Georgia fans have echoed a similar sentiment. Being at the game, and the TV broadcast is on in the press box during the game. I didn't see that moment, but you're not the only Georgia fan to say, hey, I'm not quite so sure that body language gesture from Beck was the best representation of himself, and maybe if knowing he was on camera, he might would have chosen to do that a different way. You're not the only Georgia fan who's brought that up here tonight, and I certainly think you're fair to say that. And as you also touched on, while Carson's really been the guy in the spotlight, and I think a lot of narrative and talk before the game was that somehow this would be kind of a referendum of sorts on like where Carson Beck is in this kind of final quarter pole of the regular season, this sort of fourth quarter of the regular season that's coming up. The honest truth is, as you say, I think you say it correctly, that Beck tonight was not the main reason that Georgia lost this game, that it was really kind of a thorough decimation on both sides of the ball. And, I also don't know that you can just sort of chalk this up to what is a historically tough schedule. This is, I think, obviously the toughest schedule that Georgia's ever played. It's one of the toughest schedules that anyone has ever played. But I don't know that you can chalk this up, the complete and thorough way in which Georgia was beaten. I don't think that you can necessarily just sort of chalk that up and excuse that because of a tough schedule. I don't think that's necessarily, an easy explanation for all of that. I think that, this tonight was a night in which I don't think that Georgia played up to its own standard. I think that Georgia put out an effort and a performance tonight that's clearly beneath what we've come to expect from UGA, and Georgia fans obviously have a right to feel the way they feel about that. Now, we're going to hear from Jeff Sentell. Jeff checking in from down at field level. We weren't able to get down there tonight because it's been raining and there was obviously chaos, so we're kind of tucked up here in the upper part of Vaught-Hemingway Stadium, kind of in a tight little corner here. We're going to hear from Jeff Sentell. What was he seeing at field level? Any of the kind of eyewitness accounts from him? Before we do that, let's pause. This is a 60-second break. So if you want to jump in, get your calls in, we want to take them. We want to hear from Jeff Sentell. We have a lot of talk about Georgia football, but we couldn't be on the road and bringing DawgNation coverage of games like this if not for great sponsors. Let's thank a couple of those here for 60 seconds, and then we're right back to the conversation right after that here, live from Vaught-Hemingway Stadium in Oxford, Mississippi tonight.
When you've got to haul, when you've got to mow, when you've got to feed, whatever you've got to do, whatever you've got to do, you've got to get a John Deere. Whether you're working at home or on the farm, the team at Lassiter Tractor Company can help you find the right product for you. Find your local dealer at LassiterEQ.com.
Big games deserve big meals, so let Cercheros make it happen. It's friendly Tex-Mex, served fresh every day. Cercheros Catering can handle the crowd, so it's perfect for your tailgate or watch party. Order online, pickup, or delivery. Cercheros is Georgia grown with over 30 locations throughout the state, bringing you fresh Mex, bowls, burritos, tacos, and more, with over 25 fresh toppings, customizable, just the way you like it. So find a location near you at Searcheros.com. That's Searcheros.com.
DawgNation Postgame is sponsored by Searcheros, Lassiter Tractor, and Jittery Joe's Coffee.
All right, so let's get back to it here. DawgNation Postgame Show. Georgia loses 28-10 to Ole Miss tonight. A disastrous performance, really on essentially a complete breakdown and failure on both sides of the ball. Obviously, it's the offense not achieving really anything tonight that is of, I guess, primary concern for most of the Georgia fans that we've heard from. We will continue to hear from those fans throughout the night tonight as a part of our DawgNation Postgame Show. We'll also hear from Kirby Smart and Carson Beck here coming up in a couple of minutes, too. Jeff Sentell is also standing by down there watching the game on the field at field level. Jeff, you always have a little bit of a different view of this game than I do because you're watching it from so close down there. Fans tonight are expressing a lot of frustration, as you can certainly understand, and we're giving them the space to do that. Tell us what you saw from down at field level as you watch this game unfold here tonight.
Yeah, Brandon, difficult night tonight, to say the least. Brandon, I think it's something basically as simple as 59 rushing yards. It started up front for Georgia. They couldn't block Ole Miss, and it's amazing how much different things have gotten from last year. One of the big headlines of the game when Georgia dominated Ole Miss, besides a lot of good stuff, is they never touched Carson Beck. Well, this year they touched Carson Beck a lot. They put Carson Beck on the ground a lot. Brandon, this was very much like a snake pit in terms of just the fever pitch, the fear of the Ole Miss student section. They did not like anybody that wasn't rocking Ole Miss on their field. I think the really turning point of the game for me really early, Brandon, is the way it started. Georgia gets a kick. They go in. They run the ball. They score the ball. They go up 7-0. And it looks like on that first drive, Jaxson Dart went out. And then you see Austin Simmons come in and probably look like the second best passer in the game tonight. I think he goes 5 out of 6. He gets Ole Miss to score, gives them enough time to get Jaxson Dart taped up. And then from that point of the game, Ole Miss basically owned this game. Some cliff notes, some very highlights of what was said afterward in the Georgia postgame locker room. Kirby Smart said he thought that Ole Miss was the most talented team they faced all year, even going into the game. That's what he told the team. Offense, defense, special teams. That really stood out to Kirby. He gave credit to Lane Kiffin. He gave credit to the Ole Miss football team. He did make the comment, Brennan, that they just got beat, straight up got out-coached, got outplayed. And Georgia's players were very much on the talking point of we've got to have 24 hours, go to the doctor, and then we've got to flush it because, Brendan, I'm sure you talked about this on your program, but this is a season now that we're not very accustomed to. It's a season now where Georgia has to start looking at scores, those ridiculous tiebreakers in the SEC, because there could be, and Kirby Smart even addressed it, Brandon. He said there could be probably 4, 5, 6, maybe half the league ending up 6-2 in the conference when all is said and done. So Georgia, that's getting the cart before the horse. They just got to worry about next week in Tennessee, or all this stuff is a very moot point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind telling you this. Yeah, as someone who obviously, speaks to Georgia fans on a regular basis, I think one of the things that's the most disappointing about this night tonight is it does take some of the air out of the anticipation for the atmosphere next Saturday against Tennessee, where, if Georgia won tonight, there is at least, I think, some thought that this would have almost been a playoff clinching win for Georgia, that to only have one loss going into a Tennessee game with, after that, 2 regular season games remaining, that Georgia, for all intents and purposes, would have clinched a playoff berth by, beating Ole Miss tonight. Well, now, by losing it and losing it pretty convincingly, now you sort of feel like you're back to the wall. I think it's possible that a 9-3 team could make the playoff. I don't know that it's likely. I think it's possible. And obviously, as you say, well, if there's a glut of 6-2 teams within the league with that record, then it's going to give, putting the SEC championship aside because that's a lesser concern right now, it is going to give the committee a lot to think about if you're comparing these resumes of these SEC teams. And hopefully at that point, Georgia would get acknowledged for the schedule that's been forced to play. The fact that in 3 very tough road games against highly ranked opponents, Georgia did find a way to win one of those games. They obviously lost 2 of them. but found a way to win one of them. You would hope that in a situation like that, Georgia would get the credit for that, but you probably have to beat Tennessee for that to be a real consideration. But to go back to the point that I was originally making, you know, it is disappointing that we don't get to spend a week as excited as we otherwise would be about what the atmosphere Saturday, rare kind of SEC night game this late in the season with a lot of high stakes. I think the atmosphere will be splendid. I think eventually Georgia fans will be fired up and ready to go for that. But the early portion of the week, you know, with all due respect to the Georgia players who are kind of calling for a 24-hour rule, it may take a little bit more than 24 hours for some Georgia fans to kind of get over the sting of this one here tonight.
Yeah, Brendan, it's just, I don't know if we've ever seen this from at least the Kirby Smart team. You know, one of the things down, I don't know, I just got to, this is topical on my mind, Brendan. The field storming, how they came off and they came on. Carson Beck was kind of ushered off the field like he was the president in a Secret Service drill because they were worried about fans getting in front of him with phones or trying to bump into him or something like that. And just the field storm, Brendan, you've got to go, I don't even know. Maybe you can add your collective expertise here to this, but I don't even know if Georgia's been part of a field storm ever, at least not since they've been a top 5, top 10 team in the Kirby Smart era. And you see this happening, Brandon. There's so many things that are just weird. The goalpost collapsed like right in front of me, and people don't even realize that that's a 40-foot goalpost. And then it just
That's right.
People got kind of caught underneath as it fell as they were jerking up and down. But, you know, that's an Ole Miss issue right there. That's a memory of this game. Kirby Smart said that players come to the SEC in a game like this. He said the environment was great. He said that's one of the things that make it very difficult to play here is this kind of raucous crowd. Brandon, I heard about 19 Ivory Soap worth commercials of pleasantries that were shared to anybody walking by the Ole Miss student section on both sides of the field. I mean, it is one of those things. Carson Beck met the media. Malachi Starks met the media. Now here Stackhouse met the media. One of the things they said, Brendan, it was so surreal to sit here and be 2 losses into a season because that's something Georgia hasn't really experienced a lot. And I think the big thing, Kirby had some notes. He said ETN tried to go. He also said that Tate Ratledge didn't practice all week, but they thought he could try to go because he's a veteran, because of his experience. He just didn't have the push off that leg, off that foot, and that was an issue. So they started rotating a lot. I saw Drew Brovo. They were rotating a lot of guys. They were rotating a lot of tackles. The big thing for me, Brandon, and I know this is one of those things, this is a moment to talk about Georgia football, what we saw, what we didn't see. There's something about that offensive line, my friend. The players that executed and played at a high level last year are not playing at that same level this year.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. It's maybe the most disappointing aspect of tonight for sure, and perhaps this season that, as I've told Davin Bellamy and others on the show tonight, I thought this may be Georgia's best overall position group and probably the best offensive line in the country, and it kind of hasn't been that this season. I think you're right about that. Let me address one more topic with you, though, while I have you here. You know, I think there's obviously a pretty sharp contrast between Georgia and Ole Miss in a lot of ways. I think one of the things, though, that comes to mind for me is the fact that, you know, Lane Kiffin has been very open about using NIL to court mostly transfers. They don't really have, very successful high school recruiting efforts for the most part. Some guys they sign, but that's not really their strength. They go out and get big-time transfers, and we're not naive. The assumption here is the large sums of NIL dollars that Ole Miss has been able to raise, and there are signs for donating to NIL all over Vaught-Hemingway Stadium, including QR codes in the bathrooms. They're very, very serious about pumping that message to the fans and boosters of Ole Miss all throughout the stadium. And when you think about guys who had, big nights here, it's Princely from Florida. It's obviously Nolan's all over the place. A good number of defensive players that are transfers and presumably kind of high dollar free agents in this NIL transfer portal age. Is it safe to say tonight, Jeff, that for a Georgia team that has sort of, I think, kind of positioned itself as we're not quite as NIL driven as some other programs are, did Ole Miss money whip Georgia tonight? And is a takeaway from this game that perhaps that Georgia needs to be maybe a little bit more aggressive on the NIL front and more content to at times lead with that for the sort of players that expect that to be the main part of your pitch. Is that the difference between Ole Miss and Georgia tonight? The fact that Ole Miss is very aggressive in the NIL space, using that to bring in a lot of high-profile transfers.
Yeah, I think the number is 47, Brandon. They got 47 transfers on their program. The one thing about your statement I definitely agree with is you could use any kind of the term whip with your description right there. I just think Georgia just got physically whipped, Brandon. One of the most puzzling things about this season, and we talked about the offensive line a minute ago, is that Georgia cannot run the ball. They had 59 yards rushing today. They had 70 yards basically at the half, Brandon. And sacks have a lot to do with that. But it was the defensive side of the ball for Ole Miss that made a lot of that stuff happen. There were times where Georgia's tackles looked like turnstiles. Let's just call a spade, man. And they were getting to the quarterback. They were affecting Carson Beck. It was almost like the game plan I thought early on was to try to just ride things out and not try to do too much, try to take those shots, take the checks, really work the ball to the angles and not throw the ball deep, not throw the ball down the field. But, Brendan, I don't think they could throw the ball deep because they didn't have time tonight. And a lot of that was the NIL space purchases of guys like Walter Nolan, the defensive ends from Florida, the edge guys like that. One thing we know, Brandon, Georgia will go dip into the transfer portal for weapons on offense, running backs, wide receivers, even tight ends. They don't do that on the defensive side of the ball historically. You know, Georgia did try. There was the effort there. I truly believe, in my opinion, they really went hard after Deion Walker out of Kentucky to get one of those physical mammoth. Remember when Kirby Smart said this week, immovable humans, large human beings, and that's what makes a difference in a game like this. When Georgia's not running the ball well at all for the balance of the season, and then when they meet an Ole Miss team that has the Hawks up front, bought and paid for, Brendan, you're exactly right. I kind of chuckled when I was walking around Vaught-Hemingway Stadium today. You know, like when you go to the store, that you have the ability to round up your total for charity. Well, every concession, every vendor inside Vaught-Hemingway Stadium, you could round up your total, and that would go to the Grove, their NIL collective. So you want to talk about a program kind of pulling all the gears and leverage in one direction to go get more and more players like that. That's what Ole Miss is doing. It's a different way to build the sand trap right now in the SEC. And for Lane Kiffin, when he goes tempo, and he's got the ability to do that on offense with a really hard-to-deal-with quarterback tonight, that's the secret sauce for them right now for the biggest win of the Lane Kiffin era.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let you go after this, but just to kind of follow up on that, I mean, you would ask the question of, well, how come Georgia has so many drops by wide receivers? An answer to that question is because the priciest wide receivers play elsewhere. How come Georgia doesn't have a consistent pass rush like what Ole Miss put on display tonight? The answer to that question would be to some because the priciest, defensive front, edge guys, defensive linemen, the priciest of those players in many cases play elsewhere. Not all cases. Obviously, we would assume the guys like Mikael Williams and even Damon Wilson drive a pretty high, bargain when it comes to their open, market value. But nonetheless, some of the premium positions that are the most impactful to the game, how come Georgia's not getting a outstanding performance from those positions? One of the possible answers could be because the players in the country who, are playing at a higher level are just getting perhaps maybe paid more money to play elsewhere.
Yeah, that's true, Brandon. It's one of those things we've seen every year. Kirby does a very good job correcting what he feels is an imbalance with the rest of the country, the market imbalances with his program, with the Georgia football program. They tried to dip into the portal to find the receivers, and they tried to really get a lot of those impact defensive linemen, which is what Ole Miss was able to do. And I think, Brandon, a really kind of sharp point, a savvy point right there is I think you made it. Georgia is doing those things, but what they're having to do is try to retain their own players in kind of the NIL space as well right now. And this is a crazy season. Kirby even mentioned that this was these 4 road games. He mentioned he rattled off Texas, he rattled off Kentucky, Alabama, and Ole Miss, not even counting the cocktail party in Jacksonville. But it was the toughest road schedule he's seen at Georgia. And another one of the post-game comments that came out, Brandon, was they He doesn't want the focus to be on the playoffs. Malachi Starks echoed that talking point as well. It's one game. The next game, the SEC schedule is enough right now. And Georgia's got to finish going through this gauntlet to try and finish with a 10-2 season, which, considering what they've went through with so many ills, so many things they got to go to the doctor about, pass protection, running the ball, drop passes. There's a lot of things tonight about this game. Brendan, we just saw Ole Miss score 60 points last week, I believe. And there was a part where, even though the game, I think, was at 16-7 at the half, I feel like Ole Miss, through the efforts of the Georgia defense, kind of held them in check because they could have had a lot more.
Yeah, Jeff, good stuff. I appreciate your insight into all of this. I know you'll have some great photos and some things like that you'll be sharing at DawgNation. So thanks for your time, and thanks for being a part of, obviously, what is not the most fun post-game show we've ever done. A little bit makeshift because it was not quite so safe to be on the field tonight for most of this. But nonetheless, we appreciate you being a part of it, and we'll hopefully have a chance to speak to you again next Saturday night on much happier circumstances. All right, so that's Jeff Sentell. Good stuff from him. We're going to hear from Georgia coach Kirby Smart here in a moment. Also want to give you a chance to weigh in on this, too. Bad night for Georgia. We're trying to call it like it is and talk about perhaps where Georgia goes from here on that. We're getting help from all of you this evening on that, too. Jordan in Atlanta, you're next up on our DawgNation Postgame show tonight. Jordan, go ahead. Thanks for being a part of the program.
Hey, Brandon. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me on. Do you think they'll put in the backup quarterback over Carson Beck?
Well, first of all, Jordan, it's great to have you part of the show. Good to hear your voice here tonight, and I appreciate that. And thanks for the call tonight. And the question, obviously, look, at this point in time, I don't think that there's any real serious consideration about looking at a different quarterback. And that's, I think, true for a number of reasons. I think that while I've remained steadfast, I'm a big believer in the future for Gunnar Stockton. You don't get the impression that future is right now, that if Stockton was performing in practice at such a level that he could perhaps be as good for Georgia's Carson Beck or maybe even perform better, you know, a lot of us try to keep our ear to the ground for rumor mill and things like that. We'd probably be hearing that if that was the case, and I don't know that right now that's what we're hearing. I also, as we've said now a couple of times, I don't know that Beck was the main reason that Georgia lost this game. Now, a lack of confidence in Beck may have hamstrung the offensive game plan, and that may have been the main reason that Georgia lost the game. But in terms of the overall throws tonight, for instance, the Beck interception was tipped. The fumbles that obviously Beck was responsible for, most of that was seemingly coming because of relentless pass rush. Tonight, I think that Beck, who was not spectacular, and the overall stat line is really pretty meager. I think that Beck just simply goes on the list along with an ineffective running game. Our producer Jay Black saying a moment ago that the longest run tonight from scrimmage for Georgia is just 8 yards. That this is not it's just not a very explosive running game. It's not a very explosive passing game. And so Beck's issues go alongside the wide receiver drops, the issues with the offensive line, the ineffectiveness of the running game, that it's kind of all right now sort of in the same soup together. And so for better or worse, I think that Beck is going to be their guy, barring injury, for the remainder of the season. So those are some of my thoughts on how this played out tonight. We've been enjoying your calls on this too. But what did the coach himself, Kirby Smart, have to say? After the game a moment ago, Kirby trying to spin it forward and get everybody focused in on where the Dogs need to go from here. This is what he said, at least a portion of what he said as part of our DawgNation postgame show from Vaught Hemingway Stadium tonight.
Yeah, first off, a lot of credit to Ole Miss. Great atmosphere. They played a really good game. I thought Lane had his team ready to play. We obviously struggled in a lot of areas. We had miscues, mistakes, penalties, things that are really hard to overcome, especially when you play a really good football team, and they are. I told our team coming into this week, I felt like they were probably the most talented team that we had played, counting both sides of the ball and special teams. They have elite specialists, and they have really good players on defense and the skill positions on offense. So give their quarterback credit. He made a lot of really good throws, and their defense affected us with the pass rush. So a lot of credit goes to Lane and his staff. look, they really should be undefeated. I know people think that's not true, but they really controlled the game against LSU the whole game and lost it. And they're playing good football, and they outplayed us tonight, outcoached us, and did a great job.
Kirby, other than that first drive, what was the struggle as an offense to find a rhythm tonight?
Well, we didn't have a great run game going, and sometimes we ran the ball well. I thought that their front defensively stunts and moves a lot, so they're very disruptive. So you have to be willing to go outside. We had some outside run game. I thought Nate did a really good job. Unfortunately, he had a turnover, but he ran the ball really hard. And we talked all week about how they go after the ball. So give them credit, but when you have the penalties we have and you have the sacks, you're not going to be very successful, right? Penalties stop drives, and sacks stop drives, and we had both those.
Next question. You talked about the offensive line. You're dealing with
Kirby Smart there. All right, so that's Kirby Smart there. You can go to the DawgNation. That's Kirby Smart there. You can go to the DawgNation YouTube page and see the entirety of the Kirby Smart press conference. I hope you will check that out. We're also going to give you a little taste of Carson Beck, what he had to say in a moment. Kirby owning some of the offensive struggles. You hear that there, using the word outcoach, saying that Ole Miss outcoached Georgia tonight, and also trying to offer an explanation for why this Georgia offense could just not get anything going. And it's been a long time since I've seen Georgia across the board be as ineffective as it was tonight, really giving itself no chance to win. We're so used to at least some version of what happened against Alabama, where the comeback occurs and where eventually Georgia, as a sort of a second-half team, finds a way to play some good football. That moment and that spark never came tonight. This was a complete and total failure by Georgia on the offensive side of the ball. Still give out a player of the game here. We'll give a shout-out to our friends at Serve Pro and congratulate Dan Jaxson, who stepped up and got an interception in the early stage of this game. Opening drive for the Rebels, and boy, doesn't that seem like 1,000 lifetimes ago that Georgia was getting after Jaxson Dart, essentially knocking him out of the game. Jaxson getting the interception. Not a night worth celebrating here, but we'll still honor Dan Jaxson for a good evening, and we'll make him our player of the game, presented by Serve Pro. And, of course, Georgia, they got quite a mess to clean up as they leave Oxford, Mississippi. If you've got your own mess to clean up, fire damage, water intrusion, something like that, well, our friends at Serpro, their restoration specialists want to put it all back together for you like it never even happened. That's what they do, and that's what they can do for you too. So if you've got the home that you live in has been damaged because, let's say, the roof, got a hole in it, or if the warehouse that you keep your business, let's say it caught on fire, that kind of thing happens. Any kind of thing like that where there's a mess to be cleaned up, our friends at Servpro want to help you with it. Find them online, servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com for more on that. Now, for more on the loss to Ole Miss by the Georgia Bulldogs here tonight, you heard Kirby Smart. How about some from Carson Beck on this? What did he think about just a really inept, meager performance from the Georgia offense? No spark, no fire whatsoever. We've had a couple of folks that not necessarily critical of Beck's play primarily, but critical of what they thought was not great body language from him at the end of the game. Let's hear a little bit of Carson Beck sharing his thoughts on what happened tonight against Ole Miss.
Yeah, I mean, you look at their defense. I mean, they played a hell of a game. We struggled to move the ball there after that first touchdown. After the defense was able to get a turnover and we found some momentum. We started to move the ball better in the second half. It just seemed like we stalled out at times and didn't finish drives whenever we were moving the ball. Just a couple costly mistakes, but I mean their defense played really well.
From the outside, it looked like you had a little bit more zip on your pass, a little bit more confidence. Did you feel you were better today?
I mean, I felt good out there. Thought we had some really good plays. Being able to extend the ball or extend plays and pass the ball efficiently at times. We just, like I said, we just were stalling out, and it's really not about how I play, but how we play. And we just try to go 1-0 every week, and we obviously weren't able to accomplish that.
And knowing that it's a 12-team playoff this year, obviously you guys are still in the thick of things for that. Does that change your outlook on these final 3 regular season games?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it does. Obviously, with the outcome of tonight, we can't go back and change it. It is what it is, and well, guess what? Being in the SEC means next week we got a big game, so we're going to put this to bed and give ourselves 24 hours, go lock in tomorrow and see what, we did wrong, go watch the film, and then we're moving on to Tennessee because we got a really big week next week.
How did their pass rush impact you? Why do you think they had?
So you can go to the DawgNation You can go to the DawgNation YouTube page and see the rest of the Carson Beck interview. I mentioned the scene with him. I guess it's starting to go viral a little bit on social media. I am seeing this with 3:30 to go in the fourth quarter, with Georgia down 22-10. Like, one of the main Barstool accounts, for instance, is sharing this. It's already got 116,000 views. Obviously a lot of folks reacting to what might be, a smile that a lot of Georgia fans did not like to see from Beck at the end of the game. Really try to be careful to not make too big of a deal about, body language, things like that. Sometimes the camera catches the exact wrong time, and it makes you kind of come across looking the way that you don't want to do. And I have some experience with that too, of sometimes you get caught on video a little bit different than you'd like to be. And, maybe that's the case for Beck. But obviously when you're in a situation like him, a guy who's invited a lot of attention because of some of the things he's been a part of, certainly no stranger to being on every TikTok video in the world right now. When you invite a lot of attention, sometimes you're going to get a lot of attention. And Beck right now, as the prominent face of a Georgia team tonight that played far below its standard, the conversation at a certain point becomes a little bit difficult to control. And perhaps this conversation kind of veering in a direction that Carson Beck would perhaps, like for it not to be veering into. But it seems like some folks are noticing that, here a bit tonight. But ultimately, as Carson said, this is not just about him. It's about the entirety of not just the Georgia offense, but the team itself. And certainly it seemed like to me tonight, for better or worse, Georgia was playing as an attempt to minimize Beck's impact on this game, obviously after 3 interceptions last week against Florida. Now, you can judge for yourself, was that a successful game plan or not. Carson mentioning that the offense seemingly had more success in the second half, but certainly the point total doesn't suggest that. There were drives, and as one of our callers, I believe it was Kathy, mentioned earlier, Georgia ends up winning the time of possession for tonight, but most of that was because of just sort of the empty calories. Ole Miss content to let Georgia throw underneath, check down, as it did a lot tonight, knowing that every single yard that Georgia gained, if it also came coupled with reduced clock time, was only increasing the likelihood that Ole Miss got a win tonight, because Ole Miss ultimately, certainly by the way they played defensively, did not believe in Georgia's ability to sort of strike with the explosive play that gave Georgia the real legitimate chance to get back in this football game there. So if there was anything that was perceived to be a better offensive performance in the second half, most of that yardage I would describe as empty calories. Georgia never did anything tonight on the offensive side of the ball to put any fear into Ole Miss whatsoever. We'll get ready to wrap up here in a couple of minutes. Let's also kind of broaden things out for a moment and go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I'll tell you right now, I would love nothing more than to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation here at the moment. Obviously, it'd be very nice to just be leaving Oxford and sailing right to the Caribbean. We can't do that here right now, but we can go cruise around the SEC and taking a look at some of the big results here today. We'll also get an update on Alabama and LSU as they kind of get underway here too. So let's talk about some of what's going on. Tennessee right now up 14-7 on Mississippi State. Oregon in a little bit of a close battle at halftime with Maryland 14-10. That's the score there. Bama is up on LSU right now, 14-3. That's in the end of the first quarter. Those are games that are ongoing right now. If you're going to go back and look at games from earlier today, Texas blows out Florida. That game was never competitive. Obviously, you get a little bit better insight into why the timing of the announcement to bring Billy Napier back for 2025. There still seems to be some dispute about whether or not that's what Florida actually announced. But whatever the announcement was, you sort of understand why Florida made it ahead of this stretch of games in which they expect to lose. There was an upset in the ACC today as Miami, who came in today 4th ranked in the CFP rankings, lose at Georgia Tech. And frankly, 28-23 is the final, but the game itself is actually pretty decisive. It seems like Tech, for the most part, sort of led wire to wire there. Another upset loss for Iowa State. Their time as a contender is probably about done here. Indiana does hold on to beat Michigan, closer than experts would have thought, but a win for Indiana against the best team they've played here thus far, but by just 5 points. Colorado comes storming back. They were losing for much of the day today, but comes storming back to beat Texas Tech 41-27. So that's some of the action there. And by the way, all of a sudden, Deion Sanders, the Colorado Buffaloes, putting together a very impressive season on the road here in Lubbock. Texas Tech had just beaten Iowa State. Deion, Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, these Colorado Buffaloes starting to play some pretty good football here right now. Very impressive performance from them. Obviously, a very different story for these Georgia Bulldogs here right now. So let me thank our friends at Royal Caribbean and remind you that if you want some happier things to look forward to than a tough night like tonight, well, check out Jessica Slater. You can email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com, and she can get you on board our Dog Nation cruise coming up this April. You can also look at all the great things. We're coming up on kind of like the holiday time of year. Typically, Royal Caribbean has a lot of Black Friday-style sales and things like that. So if you want the best savings on some sailings for early 2025, as we kind of move towards Thanksgiving, could be your best time to do that. In fact, some of those savings are even right now. Jessica Slater can tell you about all of that. You always get the best deal the sooner that you book. So if you're thinking about something more enjoyable than a Georgia lost to Ole Miss, a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation would certainly count as that. Jessica Slater can help you out with all of that. So for now, we're going to wrap things up here. Thanks to everybody who made this possible here tonight. A lot of folks working hard back there in our Atlanta Dog Nation World Headquarters studios. Jay Black. Is that Danny there with you tonight, Jay? We're going to shout out, Cast of Thousands. Our buddy Danny, our buddy Jack Leo, always love him. And, of course, Jay Black back there holding the fort down. You know, we got a lot of folks here in Oxford working hard. We heard from Jeff Sentell. Great to have Davin Bellamy as a part of the show. All of you who watched, those of you who called. You know, listen, there's something to be said for coming together on a night like this and just sort of trying to figure out where it all goes from here. Dog Nation in a bad mood tonight. Ugly performance on the field against Ole Miss. Rebels have a lot to celebrate, and Georgia all of a sudden now has some pressure-packed moments ahead as they try to keep their college football playoff hopes alive. Check out DawgNation.com to read all the stories from tonight's game, all the press conference stuff there on the Dog Nation YouTube page, and I'll see you Monday morning for Dog Nation Daily. We'll look forward to talking to them. Have a great rest of your weekend, everybody.